author kicking off today's event is Travis McHenry, joining all the way from the US. Travis is the author of nearly a dozen tarot and oracle decks, including the best-selling Occult Tarot, Angel Tarot, and Hieronymus Bosch Tarot. He is an expert in occult traditions from all over the world and is widely considered one of the foremost occultists of the modern era. He'll be talking about unveiling spiritual wisdom through the history of the occult. Without further ado, here is Travis McHenry.
Hi, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. My name is Travis McHenry. I'm the author of, I think, 13 now tarot and oracle decks. So that will be the focus of my talk today, is really the history of the tarot. And when I started investigating tarot for myself, I said, well, who decided what these cards mean? Because it seemed like there were pretty specific meanings for each card, and it wasn't enough for me to learn the cards for myself. I really wanted to understand the history of that. Why does the Ten of Pentacles mean what it means, or what people say it means? So in the course of digging through the history of the tarot and trying to really get to the source of that knowledge, of that information, I ended up creating my own tarot deck, which became the Occult Tarot, because I felt like there was a lot of gaps in knowledge about the tarot, and also a lot more room for it to be used in ritual magic. So that my journey, my struggle to try to figure out why every tarot card means what it means, led me to create my very first tarot deck, which is kind of a cool thing. So real quick, I just want to tell you how I discovered the tarot myself. And I wonder if your stories are the same. So please feel free to share some feedback in the questions box. So when I was about 13 years old, I read a book for young adults called The Eyes of the Tarot. And it was about this teenage girl who finds an old deck of tarot cards, and basically the deck sort of comes to life. Like, she is out on the beach and she actually sees death riding on a horse down the beach, and the magician comes to her in her dreams, and things like that. And it was an interesting way of introducing me to the cards as though they were their own characters. So very shortly after reading that book, I bought my very first deck of tarot cards. Let's see if I can get that on camera here. This is a Chinese knockoff of the Rider-Waite deck. And it's pretty poor quality, but the one good thing is it's got the meanings for every card right at the bottom. So it was good for me, for someone who is just starting out, to understand what the tarot was. And then I set it aside. I didn't really use the tarot for about another 20 years. I said, I think I'm going to dig that old deck out and teach myself how to use it. So that was how I came to the tarot. And then here I am, I think 10 years or 11 years after that, I'm now one of the renowned experts on tarot. So the information I'm going to share with you all today comes from a book that I just finished writing for Rockpool. It's called An Occult Guide to the Tarot. So we're planning on releasing this book next year. It's going to be loaded with pictures of different decks throughout history to show you the evolution of tarot, where it really came from, and how we got the decks that we have today. So to understand tarot, we're going to break it into two different sections. First is the history of the cards themselves, the physical cards that we use, that we hold in our hands. Where did these things come from? And then separately, the meanings behind those cards. So the cards actually originate in China. That's the origin of all playing cards. And they started as sort of a game to be used when people were drinking. So imagine, we have drinking games now with playing cards. It was exactly the same way in 1100 AD in China. I'm going to try and do a screen share here to show you what the cards look like. So let's do that real quick. So this gives you an example of what the playing cards actually look like. They were sort of long. The Chinese actually used the word leaf to describe them, which led some scholars to think that they used actual leaves, but that's not the case. These were just long, slender pieces of slightly rigid paper. So the Chinese created these. They were really good at making paper products already and used those as part of a game. Some scholars think that there was a predecessor game to these game of cards using bones or pieces of like carved antlers or something like that. But regardless, the people in India, Hindus, picked up the card game really, really, really quick. It's difficult to exactly explain why that happened, but Hindus in India very quickly started creating their own form of card games using pressed paper with designs on it, exactly the way the Chinese did. But the Hindus did something interesting. They added a religious aspect to it. So they would put like images of the avatars of Vishnu or various gods, scenes like that on their cards. So it wasn't solely a game designed like the Chinese had just to get you drunk and enjoy yourself. They were trying to add a spiritual component to it, which is really interesting considering what we use tarot cards today as like a spiritual tool. So the Hindus in India actually wanted to create a tool that was both fun and religious as well. So after the playing cards traveled through India, they went through Persia, and finally landed in Egypt in the 1200s in the Mamluk Empire. And I'm going to show you again, I'll share my screen real quick so you can see what these cards look like. And you can see how different they are from what the Chinese had. So these playing cards, this is a king and this is I think an ace. And you can see it's got in very, very intricate designs. One key element to the Mamluk playing cards is that they did not have any images of people on them. And this is because there is an Islamic prohibition against idolatry. So Muslims are very careful about depicting people in a way that would sort of elevate them or possibly cause you to worship them. They're really, really careful about it. So the easier way was to make these really beautifully illustrated designs. And these were the playing cards that we know today, but they obviously look very, very different. So again, that's kind of a cool thing that the Mamluks added to the Muslims added to playing cards to make them fall outside of religious prohibitions, yet be a game that they could play and enjoy and have as a recreation activity. So that's how playing cards then got to Europe through Mamluk trading channels, Arab trading channels from Egypt and Persia into Spain and Italy. Scholarship is still out on where they landed first. I personally think it was they landed in Spain first for a variety of reasons, but let's just say they landed in Europe. So Europeans, the very first thing they did when playing cards landed in Europe was put people on the cards. Within a few years of the Mamluks introducing them to Europeans, the Spanish said, well, why doesn't this have a picture of a king on it? If we're going to call it a king, let's put a king on it. And if this is going to be a deputy, why don't we call it a page or a knight? And then also Europeans converted one of the court cards from second lieutenant to queen. So that's where we get the king, the queen, and the page of the traditional playing cards. And they illustrated them. They wanted there to be just sort of a general idea of a person on it. These were not specific people yet. That comes much later in playing card history. But this would be in the early 1300s to mid 1300s in Spain. And playing cards took Europe by storm. This was like, I mean, it was like when social media got invented. At first, a few people tried it, and then next thing you know, there's billions of people on Facebook, and it's becoming a problem. And courts have to get involved, and we got to make laws about social media and all that kind of thing. Playing cards were exactly the same thing in medieval Europe. So people started playing with playing cards, and they could not get enough of them. It was like an overnight addiction, and as I said, they spread through Europe like wildfire. Everybody wanted to play with playing cards. So, of course, religious authorities looked at this and said, well, is this contributing to positive spirituality, or is it detracting from spirituality? And of course, playing cards and getting drunk and gambling with your friends is not really a very it's not an activity that's conducive to positive spirituality. So religious authorities almost immediately started trying to ban the use of playing cards, restrict the sale, restrict the creation. In Germany, there was a whole series of classes of people who were allowed to play with playing cards and people who were not. And the laws are really interesting if you go back and read the original laws. Like, certain members of the city government were not allowed to use playing cards, but like common people who just had normal jobs were allowed to play with playing cards. And they set up that restriction because they wanted people who were in responsible positions to be responsible, to not gamble away, their own funds, or maybe even the city's funds, the city treasury funds. And also, playing cards were viewed as a vice. Right from the minute they hit Europe, they were viewed as a religious and social vice. That's really, really important to how we get tarot cards later. So that lasted for about 70 to almost 100 years, where playing cards were used by a lot of different people in Europe. Playing card games became really popular, and different decks were being created throughout Europe. Almost none of these decks survived to the present day because they weren't printed on really like sturdy paper. They didn't have cardboard really back then, or high quality card stock like we have today. So most of these were printed on slightly rigid or slightly thick paper that has since disintegrated. So we have very, very few examples of cards from that specific time period, from the 1300s to the 1400s. Now, when we come into the 1400s, we have a problem. The problem is Italian nobles who were patrons of the church. These are, so at that time, the most powerful people on planet Earth were the Duke of Milan and the various other Italian leaders, who were all noblemen, noblewomen, who were directly connected with the papacy, the Pope, and the Catholic Church. They could not look like they were engaging in vice all the time because A, it would create friction between them and the church, and B, it creates friction between them and the people that they're in charge of, that they're ruling over. So the Italian nobles had to think of a way. How can we make playing cards not a vice? Is there something we can do to change it so that it's actually beneficial for us to play this game that we love playing so much? And the trick comes from something called the triumphs. And again, I'm going to share my screen real quick so you can see what I'm talking about, what a triumph actually is. So this is an example of a triumph. This is the triumph of time. This is what you're looking at here. So triumphs were a very popular subject for, especially in Renaissance Italy, for artists and poets and writers to use as sort of their theme, these triumphs. And you can see where the name triumph comes from. Look at this parade happening in front of us here. You've got a whole group of people around it, and the theme, the allegory, the idea itself is being paraded through the city in glory. So it's considered a triumph. And this was a really common topic of art and literature back at that time, back in the late 1300s, early 1400s. So here's what the Duke of Milan did, or somebody in his family. He basically said, listen, all these paintings are out there of the triumphs. What if we were to incorporate these paintings into the deck? And somebody agreed that was a good idea. So basically, they took the first set of triumphs, and I will show you each of these individually here in a second, took the first sets of triumphs and said, we're going to call these, in English, we would call them trump cards. They became what we would now call the major arcana, those initial cards that were added to the deck of 52 cards. They add those on and created a game called Trifani. Trifani is triumphal, basically the Italian word for triumphs. And that's where we get the major arcana. Now, let me show you some examples of these, and then I'll circle back and I'll really explain to you why these things helped the game take off the way it did. So here are 3 of the first 6 original triumphs. You've got love, chastity, and death. So it's sort of obvious to see how these became what we know today. I mean, the death triumph looks almost as cool as the death card. The lovers, it's a little tricky to see exactly where the lovers are on that card. But if you look at the people who are watching the parade, you've got a couple here who are holding hands. These are actually all couples that are holding hands. And then the little cherubs, these are all cupids that are going to be hitting you with Cupid's arrow. Over here in the middle card, chastity. Chastity is considered the opposite of love. Chastity is binding the lovers so that they can't be amorous with one another. And it's really demonstrated by this little guy right here in the center of the chariot. It is a Cupid that is bound with his hands behind his back. That eventually becomes the hanged man, somebody who is stuck, cannot move forward, and can't get what they want. And obviously the death triumph, it would be difficult to see that as anything but the death card. So then the other 3 of the original 6 triumphs are fame, time, and eternity. You look at that eternity card, that eternity triumph, it's almost identical to the world cards as we know them today. There's virtually no change there. The time, you can see that guy standing on the center of the chariot there. That looks like the hermit. He's even got a cane. Most of the original versions of the hermit carried a cane very similar to that. The earliest versions of the hermit card were called time or father time or old man time. And the character there carried an hourglass. And then the first one, now you look at that and you say it's called fame, but how is that the chariot? Well, if you look underneath the chariot, those horses are running over a person who is dead. So think of, Renaissance Italy or medieval Italy. How could you get famous? How could you become renowned forever? Well, through war was probably the only way you were really going to gain lasting notoriety. So those are the original triumph cards. And they were integrated in hand-painted cards, specifically for the Duke of Milan and his family. So when visiting nobles came and saw these things, they were like, wow, these are awesome. I need a deck like this for my house. So he would give them away as gifts, have more created, and these became what is known as the Visconti Stravza series of tarot decks. There are several of these were created. Each one is a hand-painted work of art. Absolutely beautiful. Gold leaf on a lot of the cards as well. So they're really, they were valuable intrinsically in their time. Today, they're virtually priceless. And several publishing houses have done facsimile editions of these. They're really cool cards. But the point was that the nobles could now play this card game. And as they're coming up on the trump cards that they've got in their hand, I'm not just playing this card so I can have fun and enjoy myself and waste time. I'm playing it as I'm looking at it, I'm having a spiritual experience. I'm seeing that eternity card or the time card or the death card. And I'm having a spiritual experience in that moment. It's reminding me my time on earth is limited. I need to be thinking and focused on a higher spirituality as I'm playing this game. So in that sense, tarot, originally Trifani, and then eventually they added the night cards and made a couple rules changes, and it became known as tarot. That became a really important game in Italy. And then it spread again like wildfire. Now, King Charles in France needed a card game to amuse him because he was losing his mind. This is what they gave him. Because not only will the game amuse him, it also has all these pictures of the triumphs on it, which are going to help inspire him and enlighten him a little bit and give him some spirituality. So tarot decks became really, really popular in Europe because they were not considered a form of vice. Or if they were not considered as bad of a vice as playing cards were before them, because they had these triumph cards, these trump cards, which again, we now call the major arcana. So that really led to mass production of playing cards in mostly in Switzerland, in France, in Germany, and then in Spain, and then in Italy. Card makers found ways to use woodblock prints so they could print lots and lots and lots of these cards. And there was a period of time where they couldn't keep up with the demand. So many people wanted decks of these tarot cards that the printers themselves couldn't meet the demand. And they weren't even in competition with each other. Everybody was trying to get a piece of the pie because the pie was so big. And tarot in that sense is still popular in Europe today. Obviously not to the extent it is as a divination tool, but nobody was using tarot for divination in a meaningful way up until the 1700s. So we've just covered the creation of the cards themselves, how they came to be, and why a tarot deck looks the way it does. So now we're going to switch gears to talk about why the cards actually mean what they mean. Who decided that a tarot card has a specific meaning? So really the first person to sit down and say, I'm going to tell the world what every tarot card means and write my own history of the tarot was Antoine Coeur de Guesblen. Coeur de Guesblen was a French author who lived right before the French Revolution. He was working on an encyclopedia of books that was supposed to be like the collective knowledge of all humanity. And he thought the history of humanity was all interconnected in some way. So he's working on this huge series of encyclopedias, and you had to subscribe to it. So he'd finish a book, it would be sent to the printers, and then those copies would be sent out to everyone on his subscription list. And there were some really famous, notable people. Alexander Hamilton was on the subscription list here in the United States. And so, a lot of famous people were getting these books. And one of them was a count who was a French count, but he was actually living in Germany when he got his copy of Le Monde Primitif, or Primitive Knowledge, or the Primitive World. And he said, hey, I know something about these cards. Me and my dad have been researching playing cards and tarot cards, and we think they come from China. So this Count de Melette, was the first person to realize that China is where cards came from. So he starts corresponding with Coeur de Guesblen and sends him all this literature about the history of tarot, everything I just told you. But he decided, no. This isn't exactly where it is. Italy is not the birthplace of tarot. We feel it has to be older. So literally, Antoine Coeur de Guesblen got together with his friends and a deck of tarot cards, and they sort of ruminated, talked amongst themselves, brainstormed. Where could these things have originated? And the answer they came up with was ancient Egypt. He literally says that in his book. We just felt like they had Egyptian origin. So that, combined with the Count de Melette's paper about tarot and his belief that it passed from China to Persia, to Egypt, to Europe, which is true, but it was the playing cards, not tarot cards. That's, I think, where his confusion came from. So they also tried to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics, and they did an absolutely abysmal job. Their translations are completely wrong. That's how you know it's all bull, because their translations, none of them are correct. But they thought they were. So together, Coeur de Guesblen and Count de Melette write this. It's just one chapter in his huge encyclopedia, many, many, many volumes. This is just one tiny chapter. I think it's 30 pages or so, maybe even less than that, about the tarot, about its history, how it can be used for divination, and all about the secret Egyptian wisdom that is encoded in these cards. Well, that book was published right before that specific edition was published right before the French Revolution. So imagine you are a noble in, or even someone in the upper class with some money, living in France during the French Revolution. You are scared for your life every single day. You don't know if your head is the next going out to the guillotine. So they, in fear, in uncertainty, they turned to this thing now, a brand new tool that can be used for divination to tell the future. All these noblemen and upper class people went to the tarot to try to figure out what's going to happen next. Am I safe or am I not? And not just the tarot, but also playing cards as well. So general cartomancy became huge in France during the period of the French Revolution. This is where we're going to see other French authors of tarot also come about. Etila, and Marianne Lenormand. They both were all creating their own tarot decks, their own card decks, and also writing books about tarot and cartomancy and card divination. And it created a sensation in Europe. Everybody wanted these things. So it was like, here's a new use for an old thing that has been laying around your house for how many years. Now you can use it to figure out if you're going to be next on the guillotine. And so it created this huge sensation for tarot cards, not just in France, but in all of Europe. Because remember, the other noble houses of Europe were really scared that the French Revolution was going to spread across the continent. And it didn't really, because Napoleon came around and kind of stopped everything. But they were really afraid that that was going to happen. So now here we are in early 1800s France and Europe. Everybody's got a tarot deck. They're all interested in fortune telling and divination, but the dangers have sort of died down to an extent. So it's not really, the fervor isn't the way it was. But there's a small group of people who are able to earn a living doing fortune telling with tarot cards and with playing cards. And then you've got a separate group of people who are authors that are writing books about these things and also creating their own tarot decks. And rather than do their own homework and discover that, like I did, hey, the origin of tarot cards is really in Italy, rather than do that homework, they decided to capitalize on the idea that the tarot cards and cards in general have hidden knowledge from ancient Egypt. Can I say I blame them? No, I can't say that. It's a good idea. If it sells a few more tarot decks or sells a few more of their books, then why not incorporate it and use that as they say, don't sell the steak, sell the sizzle. Talking about the ancient Egyptian origin of playing cards or tarot cards is a great way to sell the sizzle. So throughout the 1800s, nobody even thought to challenge this idea. And that was the almost sole focus on tarot, was what are the ancient mysteries that need to be unlocked? What Egyptian mysteries can be unlocked? And then you have a group coming around called the Golden Dawn. And the Golden Dawn were really the first ones to look at the tarot in a new way, in a fresh way, and say, well, yeah, there may be something from ancient Egypt here, but we think there's a connection to Kabbalah, to astrology. And you look at the numbers of the cards. For example, there are 22 letters in the Egyptian alphabet. There's 22 cards in the major arcana. Okay, well, we can line those up. If you remove the court cards and the aces from the minor arcana, there are 36 cards. And there are 36 astrological decans in the zodiac. Okay, I think we can work with that. So these European philosophers of the late 1800s, specifically in the Golden Dawn, were finding ways to plug existing knowledge about occult knowledge about the way the world worked into the tarot. So then they could use it as a tool for self-realization and self-enlightenment, which is exactly the reason that tarot cards were created by the Italians in the mid 1400s for that very same purpose, not for occult reasons, but for general spiritual reasons, and more specifically, Catholic religion reasons or Christian reasons at least. So, anyways, the Golden Dawn picks these up as a tool for enlightenment. They incorporate, in addition to general spiritual philosophies, the Kabbalah and astrology into the meaning behind every card. Well, they were only able to utilize existing tarot cards. Think Tarot of Marseille, for example, or the Tarot of Papus, which was created with a specifically Egyptian flair to it. They could only utilize those to a certain extent. It became clear that the Golden Dawn needed its own tarot deck, and that is where we get this bad boy right here. And I even pulled up the full card as the first card, the Rider-Waite Tarot. So A.E. Waite, Arthur Edward Waite, was a member of the Golden Dawn and an author. And he sat down with Pamela Coleman Smith and a couple of other of his trusted compatriots in the Golden Dawn, and they decided what every card should mean and what it should look like. And then, of course, Pamela Coleman Smith illustrated all the cards. A.E. Waite wrote the book that went behind it, and Mr. Ryder was the one to put them together and publish it as a completed work. And this deck changed the face of divination, changed the face of cartomancy as we will know it forever. And that's the reason this deck is still with us today, and it's still a really, really popular deck. It was not the oldest tarot deck. It was not the first tarot deck, but it combines so many different principles crammed into one, 78 card deck that it will probably really never be triumphed, I don't think, or never be bettered. So that's how we got the Rider-Waite Tarot from this huge, long history. And A.E. Waite, by the way, he knew that tarot cards did not originate in ancient Egypt. He rejected that. I want to find the quote here. Give me 1 second. I want to find his exact quote if I can. There it is. Okay, I'll share the screen with you real quick. Okay, there you go. There is no evidence of the Egyptian origin of tarot cards. He acknowledged that that publishers were using the idea of an Egyptian backstory solely to sell more decks. But as you'll see, that didn't stop him from incorporating Egyptian concepts and ideas into his own deck of cards, because he recognized, hey, people believe this anyways. Let's incorporate it in because it can be a tool for their own personal betterment. The Sphinx doesn't just have to be an Egyptian mystery. It can represent Egyptian strength as the Egyptians might have seen it. So that's the basic background behind the creation of tarot cards and also the creation of their meanings and how we got to where we are today with what every tarot deck means. But there's more to it. So a key to the tarot is actually what you yourself bring to it. So you can go through the deck, any deck of tarot cards, and see how the images speak to you. It's really, really, really important to craft your own idea of what tarot cards mean. Some people look at the Fool and see this is a happy-go-lucky person who is just starting off on a new adventure. But to me, because I know the deep history of the Fool, I look at this and see basically failure. It could be a new beginning, but as the Fool was originally conceived, I think it's on par with the Tower card. So that's me, though. But anyone else who reads with it can have their own view on it. And that's also why it's so interesting to develop your own tarot deck, because you get to craft what the images are. You get to decide what the meaning of every card is. I think that's all I've got for right now. I want to leave some time for people to ask questions. So I've got about 20 minutes or so left on my time. If nobody has questions, I'm happy to keep going. But if there are questions, I'll take some of those.
That was absolutely fascinating. I certainly have some questions. It was great to hear how, and just amazing that it came from China. And yet again, alcohol plays a role in the evolution of humanity. You know? And right after that, you mentioned that you thought that the cards first landed in Spain. I was wondering where that thought came from.
So if you look at trade ties and basically the trade ties between the Mamluks and the Moors who were still in Spain at that time, there would have been overland trade channels where it probably would have moved a lot faster. The cards would have probably moved a lot faster into Spain. If you look at some of the original cards that we have found, these are individual cards, not full decks or anything like that. They still have some that are found in Spain. They still have some Arabic influences on them, and you can see that in the characters that have been drawn. So for my money, I'd say that Spain is the origin point in Europe for tarot cards or playing cards.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And another thing that I found really fascinating was to hear the relationship between tarot and Christianity and religion in that way is so often in these modern times are thought of as completely separate, polar opposites. You know, tarot is just pagan and idolatry, and Christianity is the other side. But they originally started together.
That's right. It actually started as a tool to enhance your relationship with the divine. The problem is where I think modern Christians really reject tarot in general is in its usage. No longer are we meditating on the Hierophant and the High Priestess. We're not meditating on those to try to get a higher spirituality. Instead, we're using them for divination. And since the Bible says don't really do fortune telling, I think that's where most of the friction originated.
Okay. Are there, you mentioned and excuse me if I'm not pronouncing this right, but the Visconti Trozza, those original kind of gold leaf cards, are they anywhere in the world? Like, could you travel to Europe and go see them behind glass?
So yes, there are several collections of those cards, the original Italian cards that you can go and visit and see in person. As part of my research in writing the book that I just finished, An Occult Guide to the Tarot, I really wanted to go to Yale University. Yale University has a huge collection of these cards. So does the Metropolitan Museum in New York, but they're not on public display. So you have to set up an appointment, request permission to sit down with them and see them, but they will let people see them, especially like accredited researchers are allowed to see them in person.
Wow, that must have just been something else to see. So much history there that I would have been just blown away. Were there, when it got into Europe, Eastern Europe, and Western Europe, there were different cultures. Was there a difference in how these cards were? I know you mentioned that the nobility was playing and some places common people were playing, but was there a different mindset around them between Slavic and Romantic kind of cultures?
Yeah, tarot cards seem to actually hit a little bit of a wall. Like they don't really go too far past Poland. If you sort of were to draw a straight line through the Slavic countries, starting at Poland, draw a line straight there, they didn't really press too far past there. Playing cards did. Now, playing cards were huge all across Europe, from Russia to Portugal, but tarot cards didn't. I think it could have something to do with the fact that in Eastern Europe you've got Orthodoxy, and on the other side of Europe you've got Catholicism, and then we had Protestantism. The Protestants come around as well. And the Protestants would have completely rejected tarot cards outright. They would not have wanted them at all.
Okay, that's really fascinating. I've got a question from Jim Davies. are all your decks based on the tarot framework, or have you stretched into creating your own oracles?
I have created my own oracles, but I still try to base my own oracles on something else. So I don't really like just coming up with ideas out of my imagination and saying, well, these are what my cards are going to mean. I still try to base them on something. So, for example, when I did the Egyptian star oracle, I looked back at the original form of Egyptian astrology and based the deck on those meanings. That really was a deck that took a very long time to develop because I had to decipher hieroglyphics and read all these, papers written in foreign languages about hieroglyphics to understand how did the Egyptians view the 36 decans of the night sky. So that was my very first, my second oracle deck. But regardless, I based it on something that already existed. And that's how I got the number 36 from the original 36 Egyptian decans. For my Oracle of Heaven and Hell, which also was just released from Rockpool earlier this year, I didn't just make up what the cards meant. I went back to the original books talking about the 72 angels, the 72 goetic demons, and what do they bring to the table? What are their astrological meanings? And that's what I incorporated into the oracle. I think it's important for an oracle deck to have a really solid base, just like the tarot has a really solid base.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you go to Egypt and actually take pictures of the hieroglyphs themselves and included that in the deck?
Yeah, the actual tomb art. So the art in the deck, I went down into these tombs in a place called Asut, which is in the Western Desert. It's like completely inhospitable and really hellish, frankly. And I was there in the summer, by the way. So we actually went into these tombs and I photographed the artwork that would be used on the cards. And the same way out in the Siwa Oasis. Again, that's a journey that is, I think it took us 12 hours in a car all the way across the northern part of Egypt to almost the border with Libya, into the mountain of the dead, into these tombs from the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom period, and the New Kingdom as well, and photographed the tombs and then found places to put them on the cards.
Wow, that is just fantastic. Is it not?
It's a new level of meaning,
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I keep asking questions all day. This is a fantastic stuff, and it's been really fascinating. And this upcoming book is gonna be, I just can't wait to read it myself. I will get access to the manuscript early, so I'll be taking a peek. But thank you so much, Travis, for coming on, for sharing your knowledge, for continuing to bring light to the many darker corners of spiritual wisdom. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Knowledge is light, so that's why I never stop learning.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you.